What up, fam? Welcome to Skill Tree, where we learn how to do just about everything. And welcome to the very first edition to the Never gets old for me. So in case you're new here or missed the announcement, is a little competition between a few YouTube creators. Borg3d, Geeked Out Hobbies, and yours truly form the triumvirate at the heart of the madness. The way it works is two of us will go head to head trying to make the same project while one of us judges. In the same time, we strongly hope that you guys will participate as well. All of our subscribers kind of jumping in on it, jumping on the Discord, which is in the description. Show us what you're working on, bandy ideas with us. I know I definitely got a little bit of help while I was figuring stuff out from Discord. But yeah, jump in. It's a good time. We're building something together. Speaking of building something, on this our maiden voyage, Borg3d and I were to go head to head in making a beer stein. So today, not only am I going to show you my piece, I'm not going to show you my piece. I'm going to walk you through how I made it, so if you want to, you can make one too. So with all that said, hit me with a drum roll. So my skill monkeys and fellow competitors, for your consideration, I give you my beer stein. What you see before you is the Gentleman Bastard's tankard, made from only the finest materials that money can buy. To construct this pinnacle of human engineering, we're going to have to rely really hardly on our woodworking skills and also do a little bit of that metal crafting. Oh, and when I'm done with this build, stick around for something a little extra afterwards. Now I know my skill monkeys are always ready to throw down, so without much further ado, let's level up these skills. Step 1, making the cup. Okay, so the body of my stein is made up of a bunch of wooden staves that are cut at precise angles to form this circle. So really quick, to figure out what angle these have to be, all you have to do is take 360, which is the number of degrees in a circle, and divide that by the amount of staves that you want to put in. So I put in 8, so I do 360 divided by 8. Now, since each one of these staves has 2 angles, you're angling 2 sides, you then take that number and you divide it by 2. So 360 divided by 8 is 45, 45 divided by 2 is 22.5, so that's the angle of the cut I need to make. 22.5 degrees cut off of this 90-degree angle, you're left with 67.5 degrees. Exactly. So as long as I cut each side at exactly 67.5 degrees, it should come together to form a perfect circle. This immediately brought me to my first issue. I don't have a table saw. I've always either been in a situation where I was working on like a job site where there was a table saw, or I was in a makerspace where it was provided. I've never really needed one. This led to a long session of trying to work out how I could possibly make such a precise cut. When you have access to a table saw, you really underestimate how the right tool for the right job really makes a giant difference. But after a good long time turning the problem over, I had the seed of an idea. If I made one perfect cut with a chop saw, I could use the 2 cut pieces as a jig. By lining my pieces up with one of the corners, I'd be able to use a block plane to trim off that excess material. In theory, leaving me with the same angle that I cut those boards at. To this end, I made this. Behold, the Angler 2000. The boards on the top create a flat running surface for the planer. Inside are 2x4s, like so, providing the correct angles. So as much of a pain as this immediate stumbling block was, it was actually kind of fun, after the fact, to sit and figure out how to do this thing. Like, it was rewarding. I came up with that idea. I'm sure somebody else has done something similar at some point, but I didn't know about it, and I couldn't find any reference to it on the internet. So, yeah, kind of proud of it. It was a neat little workaround. Anyway, I went ahead and cut my 1.5 by 1/2 inch oak boards into 8 8-inch staves. Then set them into the Angler 2000 and got to planing. Again, I should stretch before I pat myself on the back this hard, but these angles came out perfect. I am seriously impressed with myself for how good these things came out. Maybe it was luck, but they came out perfect. And all told, it took maybe 15 minutes to get all 8 of these done. Once they were all set, I lined them up and traced the shape of another 1/2 inch oak board about 1/2 inch up from the bottom. This is going to end up being where the bottom of the tankard sits into. To remove this material, first I cut my 2 lines. Then I made multiple cuts between them. Using a chisel, I knocked out the little fingers of wood and cleaned out the space. I then smoothed it out with a flat file and tested the overall fit. After all the grooves were cut, I used that space to line all the staves up evenly and stuck them to some masking tape to keep them together. This allowed me to truly test the angles out for the first time. So like, talking a big swag about these angles and stuff, but it wasn't until this point right there that I realized it was actually going to work out. Until then, I was super worried. So yeah, needless to say, when that came together nicely, I was relieved. So with that all looking good, it was time to make the bottom of the mug. I glued together a few cut off pieces of oak for this purpose. Using my octagonal mug body, I traced its shape onto some cardboard, then marked a 1/4 inch from the sides and cut it all out. Finally, I tested the fit. Adjust the size of your template while it's still just cardboard to make sure it fits as snugly as possible. Happy with that, I traced the shape onto my glue up and cut it out with a handsaw. The finished product here fit really snugly into the fruit roll-up that was my Stein at the time. Once I was pleased with that, I started pouring on the Titebond wood glue on every surface that needed to stick, going back through with a paintbrush to spread it as evenly as possible. Then I rolled that sucker up and clamped it all together with these big-ass hose clamps. Glue seeking out from your joints, by the way, is a good sign that you're having a strong positive seal. Just make sure you clean them up a little bit afterwards. Once it was dry, I looked it over for any openings or cracks, then sanded off the excess glue and rounded off the hard edges. To make the top and bottoms perfectly flat, I marked them with a pencil held flat against the table, and then cut off the excess with a handsaw. So at this point, the rim here was way too thick to comfortably sip out of. I want this thing to be a usable mug. To fix this issue, I drew a line roughly center of the ring. Then, using a belt sander, I shaped it at an angle to my mark. I also angled the inside with a flat file for maximal drinking comfort. The finished result is this beautiful oak cup. But this challenge is not to make a cup, it is to make an epic beer stein. Something that any barfly would be happy to drown in. So to kick this sucker up to 11, it's time for Step 2. Steel bands. So in my brain box, when I picture a beer stein, I picture one of those like ye olde whiskey barrel looking things with the metal bands on them. And I really wanted to add that element to my stein, so I did. And this is how. For this purpose, I picked up a 1/2 inch by 1/8 flat steel stock. I started by marking the steel at one of the stein's corners. Notice I started halfway between one of the staves. That was just kind of a choice for this look here. I kind of figured I wanted this one to end and the handle to end halfway on the next one. I thought it would look cool, and I stand by it. Once that was marked, I cut a groove at the line with an angle grinder. Using the cup as a guide, I tapped the steel into shape, then marked off the next angle. Another quick note, you really want to do it this way where you bend it into shape and then mark off the next angle. Originally, I just made a measurement, like I knew the thickness of these staves, right? So I just made measurements and then I cut them all. And when you close it, it doesn't work out. It ends up being a lot smaller than it needs to be. So just be safe and use the cup itself as your measuring tool. At this point though, it's really just rinse and repeat. Mark your angles, cut it with the angle grinder, bend it into shape. The last cut here was made with a hacksaw and a file because the grinder wouldn't fit inside of the ring I was forming. Before bending that last cut though, I marked the point halfway between the cut and the final corner. Then securing it at that mark, I bent it at a 90 degree. Finally, I twisted the stock a 1/4 turn to form the support of the handle. To add a little design, I trimmed off the ends into points and cleaned them up with a file. Cool, so just bang that out twice, one for the top and one for the bottom, and then meet me back here for Step 3, finishing touches. In this step, we're gonna lock in the handle, get the stain done, get this sucker all prettied up and put together. For my handle, I picked up this 3/8 square stock, as well as a 3/8 threaded rod, and these fancy brass cap nuts. Making sure there was enough room for my hand, I marked the support, and then cut off the excess stock. Then I drilled the holes for the threaded rod to pass through. Finally, I checked the handle length to cut the square stock to size, and put everything together to see how it looked. Satisfied with the fit, I drilled out 1/8-inch holes on every face of the banding to attach it to the mug. Then spray painted them with a textured black. Now I like this darker look and I think it kind of went with the overall theme, but I also wanted to show off the natural color of the wood because it was really pretty. So I went with this awesome two-toned effect, which turned out really good. To do this, I used masking tape and taped off the inside lip of the rim to avoid any unwanted marks. Then I stained the whole cup a rich mahogany brown, being sure to hit around the taped off area with a drier brush to keep the stain from bleeding underneath the tape. Something went wrong with the footage of it as well, but once that was dry, I actually added a spray-on shellac. Not much to see, I just kind of sprayed it with a can, but shellac is pretty cool. It's going to protect the finish, and it's also non-toxic, so it's perfectly safe to drink out of. Using these little brass screws, I brought this challenge to a close with class and style. See this little guy? This is the microphone that came with my camera. Okay, so the mic drop might have been a little bit cocky. After all, I don't know what Borg is coming up with. He's super crafty, and as it stands right now, it really is an even playing field. To see how I feel about level playing fields, please check out this video right here. So to place my thumb in the scales of fate and to firmly press the odds ever in my favor, I figured if one badass mug is good, 2 badass mugs are better. Oh, that's right. Borg3d and I, he made 2 Steins. What are you gonna do when you're teamed up on with the Gentleman Bastard and the Clan King Stein? Nothing. That's what you're gonna do. Nothing. Share a drink with me. That's all you're gonna do. Now I want to use a completely different method to go about making this bad boy. So to make it, it's actually just a hollowed out log from an oak tree. Now, as I have all the grace and subtlety of a grizzly, I just found a tree the right diameter and pushed that mother down. Pushed it down real good. Then dragged its wooden corpse from the forest. Using a handsaw, I cut a length of wood that I thought had a nice shape and an overall personality. Having accomplished my first mighty deed of the day, I brought my prize back to the workshop for wood alchemy and whatnot. Using highly advanced methods, I drew out a circle and outlined the shape of the cavity. Then, I used a 1.5-inch Forstner bit, as well as a 13/16 spade bit, to plan out the removal of the material. Doing this gave me a clear roadmap of where to drill with which bits to get the most efficient use of my tools. With a plan and a dream, I started drilling the bulk of the material out with the Forstner bit. That left areas just big enough for the spade to do its work. I then cleaned up the rest with a good sharp chisel. Once clean, I repeated the process to get even deeper. The finished product was good, but not pretty. So in order to take that roughed up looking inside and make into this really perfect circle, I made a sanding cylinder. Just making tools, because it's too cheap to buy them. To make this, I stacked 4 pieces of scrap plywood and sunk 2 screws to hold them together. Then I drilled a hole in the center and dropped in a bolt for the drill to grab onto. Marking off the head, I chiseled the shape in, ensuring that the surface was nice and flat when finished, while also locking the bolt in place to prevent it from spinning. Using a jigsaw, I cut out the shape, then locked in the bolt with a nut. To make it a more perfect cylinder, I used the drill to spin it in some sandpaper, smoothing it out and cleaning up the shape. Then I cut out some sticky sandpaper and adhered it to the face of the cylinder. I also used a spray-on adhesive to secure some 60 grit sandpaper to the sides of my creation. This honestly worked out way better than I thought it was going to. The finished result was smooth and almost perfectly round all the way down. Okay, so with the insides all set, it's time to take it from this to this. And step 1 to that is removing all of the bark. To do this, I used a draw knife. Shaped perfectly for this task, the draw knife cut off the bark like a hot knife through butter. Really satisfying to do, actually. Be careful though, if it can cut through bark, it can cut through a thumb. Seriously, not all from this particular thing, from like general wear and tear. 9 out of 10 fingers are cut after this project. I need to invest in some gloves. I also used the knife to shape the outer walls and make the rim an even thickness all the way around. Then I tapered in the lip area with sandpaper, leaving a nice comfortable surface for my sipping pleasures. Lastly, I used sandpaper of increasing grit to smooth the whole Stein out and make it uniform. I loved the natural character of the grain here. It is exactly at this moment that I decided not to stain the wood. It just looked so pretty. It's pretty. For the handle, I decided to use this piece of antler because, look at it. Honestly, that's awesome. And fun fact, it was purchased in a pet supply store because apparently dogs like to chew antlers. So if you're like, for some reason, I need an antler, you can find a bit of antler at like Petco or something. To form this metal bracket here to hold the handle in place, I used 1 by 1/8 inch stock that I had left over from my badass buckler project. Link up here if you're interested in seeing that. Like the tree, I simply pushed this sucker over to form a 90-degree angle. Then I measured out how far I wanted the handle to come out. Here I noticed that the antler was a bit wide, but I decided to use this to my advantage. By sitting this bracket into a groove cut into the antler, I made it so that the antler itself wouldn't turn while you're drinking your heavy beers or ales or whatever. Marking off the width of my stock, I used a hacksaw to cut the groove in. Then I removed the material with an angle grinder. So one of my teeth is a replacement, long story, but in order to set that sucker in place, they drilled a little anchor into my jaw, which I was awake for. The smell of that is exactly the same smell as cutting this thing. Brought me to a dark place, guys. Anyway, using a file, I cleaned up the cut and tested the fit. Then I marked in the shape of the horn on the flat stock and used the grinder to cut it in. Using a 3/16 drill bit, I made the holes for the handle and the connection point to the mug. I also drilled a hole into the horn to secure it as well, and then I put everything together to see how it looked. Stupidly happy with what I saw, I removed the handle and hit the whole thing with a few coats of shellac. Then put it back together and added some upholstery tacks for a little extra style. And bam! Check out that sexy Stein. It looks like something a barbarian king would use for his ale. So there you have it. Those are my badass entries into the... Hold on. Now maybe you're thinking 2 entries is unfair or that I cheated. Anyways, if you like what you saw, why don't you hit me with that thumbs up and subscribe so you know when I release new content. Also be sure to check out Borg3d to see what he came up with, and Geeked Out Hobby for the judgment on the whole thing. Lastly, if you have a skill you want to see me do, leave it down in the comments section and I will add it to the list. Alright, well I better go. I'm actually really excited to see what Borg and Geeked Out came up with. In the meantime, keep leveling up, you.